Next on Newsmax Prime, the Speaker gives up the gavel. John Boehner gives his notice, and we gain perspective on his pending resignation from former House Majority Leader Tom DeLay. Then, as our next president, Dr. Ben Carson says he would give serious consideration to pulling the U.S. out of the UN. Coming up, my exclusive interview with Republican presidential candidate. And speaking of the UN, Pope Francis spoke there this morning, prompting a Catholic attorney to share her concerns about a shared agenda between the Vatican and the United Nations. Newsmax Prime starts now. Good evening. Welcome to the Friday night edition of Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Of prime interest tonight, bye-bye Boehner. House Speaker John Boehner announces he will give up the gavel for good, resigning both the speakership and his seat in Congress at the end of October. Miranda Kahn has more from our Newsmax Prime newsroom. Miranda?
JD, conservatives off Capitol Hill literally cheered when they heard the news this morning. Republican Senator Marco Rubio made the announcement at the Family Values Summit.
Just a few minutes ago, Speaker Boehner announced that he will be resigning.
Yesterday in the House chamber, the cheers went to Pope Francis. You could see the tears pouring from Speaker Boehner's eyes, an indication of just how visibly moved he was as he watched the Pope make history, becoming the first pontiff to address a joint session of Congress. In a news conference this afternoon, the Speaker explained how he made the decision to soon become history himself.
Last night I started thinking about this, and this morning I woke up and I said my prayers, as I always do, and I decided, today's the day I'm going to do this. As simple as that.
Though Boehner won't leave until the end of October, the scramble to become the next speaker has already begun. Also ahead, possible votes on funding the government and raising the debt ceiling, all of which are sure to cause some anxiety among conservatives. JD, back to you.
Thanks, Miranda. And for more on this story, we're pleased to be joined by the former House Majority Leader, Tom DeLay, Skyping in from Houston, Texas. Leader, always good to have you here on Newsmax Prime. Why now? Why do you think he decided to leave now, Tom?
Well, I'm sure there was a lot of reasons, not the least of which that he was personally fed up. You had this group of members that were going to bring a motion to the floor to vacate the chair. I think that got him concerned. I have to say that I think it's a selfless move, and he did it with class. But he also saw the handwriting on the wall. JD, you know as well as I do that when members are defending the speaker back home, his days are numbered. So I think he saw all of that and just decided that it was in the best interest of his members and the conference and the House to step aside and let another leader take over.
Tom, there is legislative business that remains, principally a continuing resolution or a fight over Planned Parenthood. Of course, this speaker criticized by the grassroots for basically turning in favor of the establishment. Is there a real danger that John Boehner, he may be stepping away from the scene, but the final vote that will be taken in the House will deal with a continuing resolution, quite possibly perhaps coupled with raising the debt ceiling, and will that create even more problems for the Republican majority, even prior to his departure?
Well, it's certainly going to create a lot of problems for the next speaker, whoever he's going to be, is going to be tagged if Boehner goes off and is rogue and gets the Democrats to vote for a continuing resolution or raising the debt limit over the objections of the majority of the Republicans. That would really be a mess. But we'll just have to see how this works out. Somebody's going to step up to leadership, and frankly, JD, this is what people have been begging for, is leadership and demanding leadership, and this pressure has come from the people up, which I'm very excited about. And so I hope that the members start listening to their constituents and figure out a way to elect a leader that will actually stop Obama in his tracks and stand on principles for the House.
And do you have someone in mind, Tom? Who would you like to see as the next speaker?
Nah, I'm not going to go there, JD. I've got some favorites of my own, but some of them won't even run. We'll see how this all washes out. McCarthy obviously is going to be the favorite, but I'm sure it's furious right now, and he's trying to lock up his votes, and he's getting an earful from a lot of members all day long. So we'll just have to see. I hope someone of real quality emerges and becomes Speaker.
Tom DeLay, former House Republican leader, Skyping in from Texas. Tom, thanks very much for your time. Let me turn now to a chief of staff from Capitol Hill who joins me here on the anchor desk. Glen Downs is the chief of staff to North Carolina Republican Walter B. Jones, Jr. Glen, let's get into the speculation. Well, obviously, the majority leader, the gentleman from California, Kevin McCarthy, is there. Who else may emerge as a candidate for Speaker?
Well, that's the interesting question. There have been a number of names that have been put forward today, many of which have immediately taken themselves out of play. So they have the Speaker's race, but it seems like at the moment the big move is for who's going to try to take the majority leader spot should McCarthy move up.
Well, I know that the majority leader wants to project an inevitability, saying, look, I'm next in line, I've got the votes lined up, but there is such conservative consternation with the current leadership team. Is that a likely scenario?
I think it's probably at this point in time the most likely scenario, mostly because I expect that they'll probably call something resembling a snap election in the House Republican Conference. The vote on the House floor to fill the vacated speakership won't happen until Boehner actually steps down at the end of October, but the House Republican Conference will try to do a quick snap election if they can get away with it.
Well, speaking of what may happen, the outgoing Speaker, meeting reporters today, essentially endorsed the majority leader. Let's take a listen.
Should McCarthy be the next Speaker?
Listen, I'm not going to be here to vote on the next Speaker, but that's up to the members. But having said that, I think that Kevin McCarthy would make an excellent Speaker.
The endorsement from the outgoing Speaker, does that carry weight with the Republican conferees?
Not like it would have used to have done, but the fact of the matter is that the change is in the air, and the big question is not so much who, in my opinion, who takes that spot, but whether whoever does take that spot manages to realize that they've misunderstood the nature of the Republican majority that they lead. And until they sort of realize that they're really ahead of a coalition government, something like you see in Europe, as opposed to something back in the 1990s, we're going to still see these same problems repeat themselves over and over again.
So, you say some people have taken themselves very publicly out of the running. There was a lot of speculation about Jeb Hensarling of Texas.
And he's one that is, as we speak, he's taken himself out of the running today.
So, it'll be interesting to see who steps up. Another Texan, Louis Gohmert, may step up as a backbencher, but still someone with seniority and a lot of currency in the conservative movement. So, if I understand correctly, as you've taken a look and counted noses and heard these public pronouncements, we may end up in a situation where the Republicans again have a Speaker who may be more interested in K Street and the establishment than the grassroots conservatives who make up the Tea Party or other important Republican factions.
Very well could happen. Very well could happen.
And so the new Speaker will say, look at the majority leader. I mean, in other words, are we going to see something of a deal where it's McCarthy as Speaker and, say, Jim Jordan of Ohio as majority leader?
That's something that conservatives on Capitol Hill are talking about right now. Now, a real good question will be, does that really change the ultimate dynamic out there with the grassroots? That really changes the people's frustration with the government here in Washington. Unless you change the way you do things, it probably won't.
So collectively, the Congress's approval rating will still remain probably in single digits, regardless of the speakership change.
Well, my early indication from sources I talked to on Capitol Hill today is that there's not much introspection there on the Hill. So it's more like, what are we going to do to keep these quote-unquote crazy people happy out there?
That's unfortunate. Glen Downs, Chief of Staff to Congressman Walter B. Jones, thanks for your assessment tonight here on the Anchor Desk. And there is more to come as Newsmax Prime continues for this Friday. Friday.